All right, I'd like to officially welcome all of you to our Songs for Soup fundraiser tonight. As you already know, tonight is our 30th, this year is our 30th anniversary of our Soup Kitchen Ministry, and we are very excited to have with us the now longest running group performing in Songs for Soup, Proof of the Pudding. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming them. For those of you who don't know, all of the groups who perform donate their time. This is the 4th year in a row that Proof of the Pudding has donated their time. And they're the only group tonight, so they win. Tonight, to celebrate our 30th anniversary by welcoming David Beckmann, fully clothed, not David Beckham, but I think that would be a good intro next time. He is a World Food Prize laureate, one of the foremost U.S. advocates for hungry and for the poor. He's the president of Bread for the World since 1991, leading large-scale and successful campaigns to strengthen U.S. political commitment to overcome hunger and poverty in this country and around the world. Prior to joining Bread for the World, he worked at the World Bank for over 15 years, overseeing large development projects and driving innovations to make the bank more effective in reducing poverty. He has been asked to testify in Congress numerous times, appearing before such committees as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Ways and Means Committee of the House of Representatives. He is a Lutheran pastor, as well as a World Bank-trained economist. He earned degrees from Yale University, Christ Seminary, and London School of Economics. 6 universities have awarded him honorary doctorates, and in 2010, he was named a laureate of the World Food Prize. Bread for the World as an organization is a collective Christian voice urging our nation's decision makers to end hunger both at home and abroad. Bread for the World members meet with and write personal letters and emails to members of Congress, and it is one of the largest organizations in the world dedicating to building the political will to end hunger. Please join me in welcoming David Beckmann.
I've been here, actually I worshiped at St. Thomas More. Well, I worshiped at Battelle Chapel and with the Lutherans, and here I was kind of a religious kid. And so I have ties with this community that go way back to my student days. And then I was here fairly recently And so I know that this community is a community that's a gospel community. I've just seen that it's a very vital community. This is a community that understands social justice and global mission, a global awareness, and clearly also a very, very talented, gifted community. So I'm glad to be with you, and for your 30th anniversary of the soup kitchen that you run. That's quite an accomplishment to keep that up for 30 years, and now to feed about 350 people once a week. This is no mean feat. And what's clear is that in addition to food, what it is relationships. Relationships that then lead you to offer art classes and connections to the health system, health services, and also relationships that are a blessing to everybody involved, whether they're people who don't have food at home or whether they're people who do have food at home. It's those relationships, those cross-class relationships are really hard to have. They're very rare, actually. And so I just want to commend you and thank you for that 30-year ministry of helping hungry people in a way that respects their dignity and sees them as part of the same community. I was asked to talk tonight about how we can change big systems in ways that will move us toward the end of hunger in our country and around the world. That's what Bread for the World does. And Bread for the World relies on active, thoughtful people like you to change laws and systems that help hungry people, poor people, on a very, very large scale. And I think I want to start by telling you about a trip I got to take to Bangladesh. My wife and I lived and worked in northwest Bangladesh 30 years ago. And a couple of years ago, I got to go back to the same place the places up in northwest Bangladesh where we lived and worked 3 decades ago. And what was best about this experience was that although people are still extremely poor, they are dramatically less poor than they were 30 years ago. You know, I went back to the same places, and it's just clear. The roads are better, the buildings are better, the kids are better nourished, visibly better nourished. There are different kinds of foods in the market, much more variety of food available to people. The women are more assertive. This is not Sweden, but women are, you know how Grameen Bank and other groups like that have worked in Bangladesh to build groups of low-income women who then do literacy education among themselves, or they do credit, but these are low-income women, rural, landless women often, who work together to improve their lot. Those groups have been transformative. And I could see 30 years later that I was talking to women. You know, they were nowhere to be seen 30 years ago. They were in the house. A foreign man would just never, you'd barely see women. So the changes have been spectacular. And I went out to, when I lived in Bangladesh, I spent a lot of time in this tiny little settlement of about 200 thatched houses called Goria. And when I was there, I lived and slept in the home of the primary school teacher, a man named Mr. Badi. At that time, his wife was pregnant, so she had gone to stay with her parents during that time. So he had a house without a woman, so I could stay in his house. And when we got out to Goria, I couldn't recognize the place because it's now a bustling rural commercial center. Everything's changed. Everything's built up. I couldn't even remember. I used to be 200 little houses. Now I couldn't find his house. I didn't know where it was. And so we asked a young woman, and she had been his student, and so she knew where Mr. Buddy lived. And we drove over that way, and I saw him on the road walking away from his house. So I jumped out of this van. I was there with the agency that I used to work for. It's now an all Bangladeshi agency. But so I jumped out of the van. I can't speak Bengali anymore. At that time, I could make my way. But he recognized me immediately, and he took me by the hand, as Asian men do, and we walked back hand in hand to his house. It's no longer a thatched house. It's a paka house. It's a concrete house. And within 5 minutes, maybe half a dozen men that I drank tea with 30 years ago were there. It was really wonderful. And their lives have changed. There's now a blacktop road from Goria to Takargao, which is the sort of big town next to there. There's the house next to Mr. Buddy's house had a satellite dish on it. They've all got cell phones. One of my old friends now has a daughter who lives in Philadelphia. And I mean, they're still very, Mr. Buddy, he talked about there was a ditch where mosquitoes used to breed right outside his house. And so one of the, he said, that ditch, it is filled up. So, and also these are devout Muslim men, and so they thank Allah that their lives have turned out much, much better than they could have imagined when they knew me. And that's a place I know, but this same thing has happened in hundreds of thousands of communities all over the world. The World Bank judges that the number of people in the world in extreme poverty has been cut in half over the last 30 years. Despite growing population, the number of people in extreme poverty has been cut in half. And it's happened in all kinds of countries. Bangladesh, Mozambique, Ghana, Brazil had made dramatic progress against poverty and hunger over the last 10, 15 years. The United Kingdom has reduced child poverty. About the time Tony Blair became Prime Minister, all three parties in the UK eventually agreed that they were going to try to end child poverty in the UK. Now, even now, after their recession, their budget cuts, there are fewer poor children in the UK than there were when Tony Blair came to power. I think, people, those of us who believe in God and can read about and understand this huge change in the world, I think we have to understand this as our loving God moving in history. I've come to see this as a great exodus in our own time. This is God answering prayers on a huge scale. And I think our loving God is asking us to get with the program. Because in our time, it is clearly possible to make much, much more progress, probably to virtually end extreme poverty and hunger within a couple decades. Now, in our own country, we have also been able to reduce poverty and hunger, mainly when we tried. The clearest, the biggest progress, the most recent huge progress that we made was in the 1960s and early 70s. That was a period of a strong economy. People could get jobs. Toward the end of people could get jobs. The wages were good. And then also under President Johnson and then also President Nixon, we made a national effort led by the government, but also communities, states. There was a national sense. You know, it's interesting that Nixon continued a lot of the war on poverty programs because we as a nation got it, that we should make an effort to reduce poverty in our country. And so it was a nationwide effort. And during those years, we cut the poverty rate in half in the United States. So this is not impossible for us. But since about 1974, we have not made much progress against poverty and hunger in the U.S. Sometimes it's gone up. It came down during the Reagan year, or during the Clinton years. The end of the Clinton administration, poverty came down by about 1/3, but then it bounced back up. And I think the main things you need to do to reduce poverty are you have to have a strong economy. That's foundational. Nobody ever reduces poverty if the economy's terrible. But then you also have to make a real effort. And we haven't had a president since Lyndon Johnson who considered poverty in America one of his top 5 priorities. Just think about it. Think of them. These are good people. We elected them. But we haven't had a president since Lyndon Johnson. Barack Obama is pretty good, but he doesn't talk about poverty. You know, it's very deliberate that he does not talk much about poverty. And if you don't talk about it, you're not going to solve the problem. So, to my mind, that lack of political commitment, it's not because the presidents are bad people. It's because they know that voters do not want to hear about poverty. They know that we don't want to hear about it. We have never had a president who made poverty in the world one of his top 20 priorities. There is no prime minister of the UK that doesn't consider poverty in the world one of his top 20 priorities. And so the Tories have been pretty good. During the budget cuts that they've been through, they have increased their international development assistance. And it's because they know that voters in their country want them to help continue the progress against hunger and poverty and disease that's happening in the poorest countries of the world. So it really does come back to political commitment. Let me just give you one specific example. It's an example that Bread for the World's done a lot of work on, but you're also all familiar with it, and that is the budget debate of the last 3 years. So the Republican budgets, the House Republican budgets of the last 3 years have proposed deep, deep cuts in government spending. And 60% of their proposed cuts in their budgets would come from programs that go only to poor people. Only to poor people. Mainly Medicaid and SNAP. Also with international development assistance, international food aid, Head Start, WIC, all these programs. Those programs have been under attack, sustained and intense, uncompromising attack for 3 years. You know, they'd be glad to cut Medicare or Social Security, but they know there are a lot of people in this room that would fight them on that, and we might not notice if they cut Medicaid or SNAP. So in fact, they've focused especially on programs that go only to poor people. The faith community, I think, has done a really good job. Bread for the World, working with Sojourners, the U.S. Catholic Conference, Catholic Charities, the Lutherans, the Methodists, also National Association of Evangelicals, Salvation Army, a very wide array of Christian leaders and organizations. When the Ryan budget first came out, said, this is not right. We can solve our nation's budget problems without making poor people poorer. And so we should form a circle of protection around programs that are focused on opportunity and help for poor people. If some of those programs don't work very well, let's make them work better or move the money to other programs that do work well, but that are focused on poor people. So that's been a major campaign for Bread for the World, working with lots of other groups for the last 3 years. The President and Congress have cut $2.5 trillion from deficits, so it's not that, all these fits and starts, they got a lot done actually. But in the end, the cuts to programs focused on poor people have only been about 3% of what the House Republican budgets have been pushing for. So I think it's an example of our power as organized people, and also the importance of public policy advocacy. Just as so that 3%, the money that we have kept from being cut comes to about $1.5 trillion over a 10-year period, or roughly $150 billion a year. That's what the House Republicans have been trying to cut. $150 billion a year. Just as a point of comparison, all the food banks, all the soup kitchens and food pantries and all of the food charity in the country comes to about $4 billion a year. So if we're serious about ending hunger and poverty, it's really important to do the soup kitchen. It is really crucial. People come here, they need help. You got to do it. You got to do it now. You can't say, wait, we'll sign you up for food stamps. You got to help now. But it is also absolutely crucial that we also be active as citizens in pushing for political will that can make change for hungry and poor people on a bigger scale, much bigger scale. Now, it's not just about getting government money. Macroeconomic policy that would reduce unemployment is much more important, is even more important. Increasing the minimum wage, that's going to be voted on. I think the Senate's going to vote on it in the first week or two of March. Increasing the minimum wage would help a lot of low-income people, and I think the evidence is pretty clear that it wouldn't put people out of work. It would just raise the wages of the bottom of many of the lowest wage workers. And they're, if you're making a minimum wage and you've got a couple kids, those kids aren't eating all the time, even if you're working full time. Immigration reform is another issue that's under consideration right now that's really important to a lot of poor people. This is an instance, this is a case in which Paul Ryan is with us, because he gets that if we help those 12 million people who are undocumented be able to get documentation, they'll be able to work their way out of poverty. And there are also people in Mexico and Central America who are really needed as apple pickers. And if we allow them to immigrate legally in some way and do those jobs, it's good for our economy, and those people will climb out of poverty. So immigration reform is another major policy issue that is really important to this great exodus from hunger that I think God is trying to pull off. So let me just tell you a little bit about Bread for the World. We're a Christian citizens movement against hunger. We organize Catholics and all stripes of Protestants all over the country. Altogether, we probably reach about 3 million people. We help people understand the connections between faith and politics and hunger. So help to give people, like in a community like this, lots of churches or communities do offerings of letters to Congress. So they invite the community to write Congress on an issue that's important to hungry people. You probably do some of that on this or other issues. What people learn is that we have power. We can change things. And you learn how you can be an active citizen and make the world more like you think God wants it to be. I think the most important thing to know about Bread for the World is that we win. We don't win everything, obviously, or we wouldn't have so much hunger. But over and over again, we are outgunned, and we are able to win big changes for hungry people. I just learned today, actually, that we've been campaigning to get reforms in international food aid, because if we ship food from Iowa to Ethiopia. So every tax dollar that's spent on international food aid, 50 cents goes to shipping and transportation, shipping and management, 50 cents. So if you buy the food, if you can buy the food in Kenya or some other place in Ethiopia, you give a market to local farmers, really poor people. You also get the food there a lot cheaper, a lot faster, and also if you ship it from Iowa, you got corn-soy blend, and who you really want to feed most of all is babies, and babies don't eat corn-soy blend. So this program needs to be reformed. It needs to be modernized, and actually in the Farm Bill and in the big appropriations bill that just went through, Congress moved on this and gave the government more flexibility, not enough, but increased flexibility to buy food locally in a place like Syria, to give people cash. If Syrian refugees are in Lebanon, if you give them cash to go to a local store and buy their food, then the Lebanese are more likely to be glad to have them in the country. If you ship food in from Iowa, they're less likely to want them in the country. So, and what I learned today was that the government just estimated that the increased flexibility that they got just over the last month will allow them to reach an extra 800,000 people a year with the same appropriation. So that's an example of how, a little example of how when we push, we really can, we can win big changes. So we're not really in the business of sketching an image of the world as we'd like it. We're in the business of winning significant, real changes this year, next year, that will affect millions of hungry people. Now, the ways you can help us are, one way is talk about it is pray, act, give. So, give, we want money for Bread for the World. We need to pay my salary, and we have about 100 staff, so that's an expense. Pray, I think, is important. Pope Francis asked Catholics, people all over the world, to pray on December 10th. I don't know if you heard about it, but there was a global wave of prayer. So people all around the world prayed at noon, and so as the world turned, there was this wave of prayer, and it was prayer to end hunger. He gets it, that we can end hunger. So one just thing, actually, partly because of the Pope Francis event, I've started, every time I say, give us this day our daily bread, I make this a dimension of that petition. When I say, give us this day our daily bread, I think, end hunger, God, end hunger. So it's not just about serving hungry people, it's about solving the problem. And then the most important thing is act. So that's, writing letters to Congress, they work. Personal letters, personal communications to Congress work. People in New Haven, your Congresswoman is Nita Lowy. She is, am I wrong? Oh, it's Rosa. Rosa, excuse me. I apologize. Well, Rosa is just spectacular. I was going to say, but anyway, Rosa DeLauro was the fiercest defender of food stamps in the recent debate. They cut, she lost. But they're going to come back again next year. And she, more than any other member of Congress, made the case for not cutting food stamps in this economy. So, I just think, do what you can to help her, to celebrate her, to encourage her. She'll do it anyway. She's just, she's wonderful. But when people at home let her know, it makes a difference that you appreciate her. And if there are students here who How many of you are students at Yale? Well, so don't forget that you can double up. So you can write to your senator from Nebraska and to the senator from Connecticut. You know, do it both. Use both addresses and let them. And you know, just. And it may be that the senators from Nebraska need to hear from you more than the senators from Connecticut. So you can go both ways. So the activism is really crucial. Just tonight, I want to pass out this petition to the president. One thing we're working on now is to try to move from just protecting existing programs to getting both parties to work for ending poverty, ending hunger. And so we've been taking up a collection to President Obama to ask him to articulate a goal. How long is it going to take us to end hunger in America? And what would it take to get there? So a goal and a plan. And you know, the last couple of months, he's been talking about poverty more than he has since he was running for election the first time. But the policies he's pushing for now, his policies about inequality and economic opportunity, would be really, really good for overcoming hunger and poverty. But he still doesn't use the word much. In the State of the Union speech, he really backed away from just acknowledging that there are tens of millions of Americans who are really hungry and poor. So anyway, I invite you to, maybe you can help me with this, just to, I invite you to help us with this petition to President Obama. Or if, you know, just for the longer haul, when you get home, just connect with us at www.bread.org, or for the people who are watching us on the live streaming feature, you go to www.bread.org, and you can see the issues we're working on and sign up, and we'll make sure you know, especially when your senators or your member of the House is in on a key decision. Let me just say one more thing, before I quit, I just want to talk about Pope Francis's recent exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel. So this is a Lutheran. In this crowd of Catholics, how many of you read this thing yet? Have you read The Joy of the Gospel? How many of you have read the Pope's exhortation? Okay. This is great. You got to read it. It is really good. Now, the problem is it's probably thought out in Spanish and translated into Latin and then translated into English. So still, I wish they could figure out a way to get peppier languages at the Vatican. It's not peppy, but it is powerful. It is very powerful. And the basic thrust of it is, as I understand it, is he says the foundational truth, the first truth that we as Christians experience is that God in Jesus Christ is gracious and merciful to us. We experience in Jesus Christ, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the love of God for us. And it is a source of great joy. And so we want to share that joy. And then he goes through, how do we share that joy? There's this great passage, it's a fairly long passage, in which he's telling Catholic priests how to preach better homilies. You'd like this. Because I mean, I know I've heard preaching here, it's really good, but it's not everywhere. And he says, look, you guys, you got to work on these. You can't just stand up on Sunday morning, you got to work. It's really a great, so it's very practical like that. But he also says, we should work to evangelize our cultures, our economic structures. So we should change our economy, the laws and structures of our world, so that they reflect in some way the love of God for every person, and make it more credible to people that our God really does love every person. And so he's just spectacular. He's got this great phrase where he says, how can it be that when the stock market falls 2 points, it's news, but when a homeless man dies in the street in our city, it's not in the news? So you as Catholic people, you just have to read what Pope Francis has to say in The Joy of the Gospel. But what he is saying to us is what Catholics across the country, few Lutherans, Methodists, and everybody else, is what we're also working with Jews and Muslims, what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to get our government to do its part to end hunger and poverty in this country and around the world. Let me take some questions or debate. Yes?
David,
yeah.
I'm really surprised to hear that we've been successful in reducing poverty. Why is that? It seems to me like that's the message that has to get out.
That's right.
This article in the Times indicated the war of poverty is better.
Right. Well, I mean, the biggest success, the biggest success, the sustained success has been globally. And people don't know that. Maybe young people do. But a lot of people don't know. Actually, I had a conversation with Senator Reid. He didn't know that the world's made progress against poverty. So a lot of us don't know that we think of poverty like it's this wall, that that's the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. So you can help a poor family, but you can't fix the problem. But that is not the case. And also in this country, certainly during the war on poverty, we dramatically reduced poverty. The counter argument is the people who say, look, we kept those programs in place and we've been spending money all these years and we haven't sustained progress. I would argue that we haven't done a very good job of sustaining the effort, and that if we had sustained the effort, we would have continued the progress.
Don't you think it'd be a good idea to publicize that we've been successful?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes?
Well, I agree that it's important to see where there are successes. I think the danger with that particular emphasis is that you overlook the disasters that we face. The farm bill you mentioned, for example, is catastrophic in every single way for the poor of this country. Catastrophic. And it was done by those elected representatives, who represent interests that have nothing to do with ending hunger in this country. So, I think it's important to encourage people with successes, but to underestimate the threats would be equally, I think, dangerous. So
I agree.
That it's sort of the prophetic side, right? And to celebrate it, I think that's important. I think that's Pope Francis is very sort of powerful. But that doesn't mean that the outrage can be moderated.
Right. We should be outraged that we put up with hunger and poverty on the scale we do. But at the same time, I think people feel, especially after the last 3 years, people feel sort of disempowered, like there's nothing we can do. And our experience over and over again is that, one person, 5 people, 5 students going in to see Rosa, she'd love them. Like we're working on this international food aid reform. That's an issue. I'm sure she's supportive, but if people here say, really provide leadership on that, she's a force to be reckoned with. I agree with your point. I didn't see. Yeah, I don't see who. Oh yeah, hi.
I have a question. I'm not American, I'm from Europe, but we have also facing also poverty and
Yeah.
kind of problem in our different levels. But my point was to say that immigration will help to reduce poverty and hunger. I don't really know the American situation, but what we face in Europe is that we don't have enough means to take care of all people or European or non-European that already live in our country, and we cannot give them enough jobs, enough education, or enough healthcare, and how really not giving will help to solve this problem.
Well, I know more about immigration into the United States. there's the Congressional Budget Office is agency of the Congress that evaluates important legislation for Congress. They estimate that the immigration reform bill that the Senate passed would increase economic growth in this country and reduce the deficit, so that it would be good for the economy. You know, clearly when there is some competition with low-wage workers who've lived here before the immigrants come, so it's not all positive, but even for low-wage workers, our judgment is, in general, is that it would do enough to strengthen the economy that it would be good for even low-wage people. And you know, it's a complicated issue. But and in this country, I think, unlike, I don't know if there are any places in Europe that are quite like this, where we have 12 million people who've been here for a long time, and they're illegal. And the trouble, I mean, in addition to families are broken up, you know, if I'm an undocumented immigrant and I get picked up for not stopping at a stop sign, I can be incarcerated that night and deported. I'll never see my children again. So from the point of view of families, it's really rough. And then also undocumented people get abused a lot. So, you know, guys get hired up off the street corner, and at the end of the day, they're not paid. So there's just, they don't have to be paid. What are you going to do? You know, you're undocumented if you try to make trouble. So women, undocumented women are abused. So this, you know, just putting up with 12 million people who are here, I mean, what's happened is, I mean, they did come in illegally, but, you know, employers are glad to hire, including a lot of families, hire undocumented people. So on one side, our country's had out a help wanted side, and on the other side, do not enter. So it just seems to me that on balance, having these 12 million people in our country who don't have legal status is, we should fix that problem. And more generally, that immigration in the world, people moving from Bangladesh to Dubai, all that, you know, from Africa to France, all those, that overall, that's a movement. A lot of people are getting out of poverty that way. Yes, sir.
I think my clarification, maybe the problem in Europe or Middle East is immigration and really refugees swamping this country. And the problem of refugees overnight basically showing up and swamping the economy and the whole society, which is a variation of our.
Mm-hmm. You know, these are all complicated issues, and people of goodwill can disagree on a lot of them. I mean, some of them not. You know, like, I mean, I think food aid reform is one that's sort of an ethical no-brainer. But anyway, even on that, I have friends who disagree for various reasons. So people of goodwill can disagree on just, you know, what is the solution that would do the best to reduce hunger and poverty. But I think people who've just heard Isaiah 58 and gone to Mass, there can be no disagreement on the importance of pushing for laws and structures that provide help and opportunity to hungry and poor people. To be active in that, to pray, act, and give, to push policy in the direction of help and opportunity for hungry people.
We have time for one more question?
Yeah.
I recently attended a comparative historical study by someone sociology, in which he presented unemployment figures, entitlement payments, and a range of things from the mid-1970s to the mid-2000s.
Yeah.
In the United States and Europe and and one of the statistics that just jumped out over all the rest was when you look at the percentage of people in the country who think that poverty is not poor person's fault. That in Europe, the UK sort of stands far away from the but the figures for the United States were far, 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 far.
You mean more people here think it's their fault?
I hesitate to use the number because it seems well, but there's a huge in the direction of it's their fault.
And I think, you know, people do have responsibility for their own lives. I have a son who had a lot of problems with addiction and alcohol, and you know, from that experience, I just know, you know, actions have consequences, and in the end, he has to get himself together, and he's now been sober for 5 years. So but I know, you know, he is not going to be, there's no way that he's going to escape a life of poverty unless he can stay sober and get to work and maintain a stable family. And so I think people do, personal responsibility is real, but I think the academic literature suggests that overwhelmingly people are poor because of the zip code they were born in, because of their race, because of the, you know, those external factors. And for that, I know that in America we think the other way. We think although even then, if you think it's, you know, then there are things you can do to help people, like with the addiction problem. You can help, you know, we can invest in drug treatment courts and things like that. So even if people feel like poverty is the fault of the poor, there are things we can do to help them get out of it. Can't solve the problems for everybody. Well, before we quit, I want to tell you a story, and I want to let you go. But I think sometimes advocacy on these big policy issues is maybe not in Yale, maybe not in New Haven, but in the population at large, it's a turnoff because it seems so abstract. You know, it seems like you come to the soup kitchen and you meet people and you have that relationship with people. You know, through advocacy, you don't have that, you know, you don't have the relationship with the person that may escape from poverty or have a better chance of escaping from poverty because of what you did. But I had a personal experience that really changed my feelings about that. I have two sons, both of them are adopted. The first son, when he got to be 18, he looked for his birth mother. We had always told him, you can't look, we told both boys, you can't look for your birth mother until you're 18. I guess we said it so strongly, they both thought it was the law. They, they thought if they'd look for their birth mother when they were 17, they'd have to go to jail. But anyway, turned 18, and right away he looked for his birth mother and found her by the web almost immediately. And she also found him and found us, and so about 2 weeks later, she joined Bread for the World. I thought that was weird. Maybe 2 months after he got in touch with her, we had dinner with her. And so I came to understand. She was a graduate student at the University of Michigan and got pregnant. Her family didn't help her very much. She was a Catholic girl. She didn't want to get an abortion, so she carried that baby, but she didn't have very much money. And so she turned to the WIC program, the Women, Infants, and Children Supplemental Food Program, Nutrition Program, to help her provide good food for her child at a time when she really couldn't afford good nutrition. So it just was very striking to me that that was during the Reagan years, when in fact the Reagan administration was pushing hard to cut funding for the WIC program. And Bread for the World members campaigned in the early 80s to maintain funding for the WIC program against those budget cuts. So what's striking to me is that if Bread for the World people hadn't done that, my own son I mean, he's a very bright guy. He went to Columbia. He's doing really well. He's creative. He's lots of fun. But if they hadn't done that, he might not be quite as bright as he is. He might have lost some of his God-given potential if they hadn't been active in advocacy. So if you ever wonder whether advocacy really benefits real people, just remember me, because I'm one person who has really benefited from advocacy for hungry people.
Thank you, David. That was fantastic. Part of the reason we invited David here tonight was to talk about the connection between the work we do here in our local soup kitchen and the much bigger need. The reality is that every week when we say grace with our volunteers at Soup Kitchen, we pray that we go out of business. Connecticut Food Bank started over 30 years ago as a temporary organization. We wanted it to be a short-term solution that found a bigger solution to the problem, and it hasn't yet. So very grateful for your helping us make that connection, for continuing all of us to be challenged to think about how we're an answer to the bigger problem. And now we're moving to the next part of our program. So many of you, kids are really excited about this part. I am going to give you a quick break, 10 minutes. You may make final bids on the auction, and both the teacup and the silent auction. Please get some birthday cake. It is out there next to the soda, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes when we'll announce the winners.